This week is the Parsha of Matos and Maseh. In this week's Parsha, it continues on the narrative from several weeks earlier from the Parsha of Balak, where Balak and Bilam conspired together to curse and destroy the Jewish people, but it ended in failure. Not only was he not successful, Bilam, to curse the Jewish people and damage them, in fact, quite the opposite. All of his prophecies were blessings. So after that, Bilam, he realized that the key to get to the Jewish people is not through his prophecies and curses. Rather, he knew that the way to bring them down is to cause them spiritual damage through immorality, promiscuity. So he schemed and devised a way to ensnare the Jewish people through seducing them to sin. And indeed that happened. We read about it in the end of the Parsha of Balak and Parsha of Pinchas. We read how there was a Magefa, there was a plague, 24,000 people died as a result of that episode because of the daughters of Midian defiled themselves and caused the Jewish people to sin. So what do we do? How do we deal with them? So in this week's Parsha, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that you need to take revenge against Midian, and you should arm from all of the Shvatim, from all of the tribes, 1,000 people should represent each tribe, and they will assemble these 12,000 soldiers and fight against Midian to do battle with them. And indeed, they were successful in this battle to the extent that we read how not one Jewish soldier died in this battle. Every single one returned home safely. So the question is a few things. Number one, it's a very interesting phenomenon. The whole notion of this battle was pure revenge. They caused us spiritual harm. They caused us to sin. Now we're going to pay them back. That's what it's all about. Since when is it a Jewish way to take revenge against someone? Seemingly, the Torah tells us revenge is not a good habit. It's not a good trait to cultivate within ourselves. Especially that the entire battle was very different than all the battles that Jewish people waged till then or from that point. Generally, there was a certain purpose or a certain goal, some tactical gain, strategic, to conquer something, to conquer land, or at least even to take a stand and instill a sense of fear or respect from their opposition, that in the future they shouldn't contemplate fighting against them. But here, it seems like there was no purpose, there was no end game. Just fight them, kill them for revenge sake. There would be no net gain. They would not acquire anything, they would not gain anything in a practical sense. Another interesting aspect to this war, which was unique from all other wars that the Jewish people waged, was generally out of the 12 tribes, out of the 12 Shvatim, at every single war, there was one tribe that was exempt from participating in the battle. And that is the Shevet, the tribe of Levi. They, at every single battle, they did not participate. Because one of the reasons given, their purpose and their mission was to devote their time and their lives to prayer, to Torah study, serving in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, and therefore they were not able to participate in these battles. However, the Torah says that all the Shvatim, all of the tribes should participate, and Rashi explains that this comes to include the Shevet of Levi as well. So why is it? Why would they participate in this battle? Why was this battle so important, so significant, that if when it seemed there was a real need to conquer portions of Eretz Yisrael, which we would subsequently settle in, inhabit, that they didn't participate in. To engage in just a war, an exercise of revenge, which seems just to get even with those who hurt us. Why is it Shevet Levi's business to participate in this venture? So indeed, we see that this battle with Midian was unique. It was very different than all the previous other battles. So we need to first understand the relationship, the nature of what motivated Midian to start up with the Jewish people in the first place. We need to get to the root, to underline the very basis of this conflict between Midian and the Jewish people. In general, in life, we know that people are motivated by various things, why people love, why people hate. We need to understand that today we'll try to understand as much as we can. Love is, of course, something very difficult to understand, but in addition to the very opposite of that, hate is also an equally interesting phenomenon, especially in the time that we are in right now, which is the 3 weeks, the Bein HaMetzarim, the 3 weeks between Shivas Ber Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, which we observed this past Thursday, until Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. These are known as the 3 weeks, which are a very tragic and sad period for the Jewish people historically, as the Beis HaMikdash, the temples were breached. The walls of Jerusalem were breached on the 17th of Tammuz, culminating in the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash on the 9th of Av. And during this time, we of course relive and think about and commemorate the experiences that we went throughout our history. But also we try to understand what is the underlying cause, the pathology of the spiritual one at least, what caused the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, to see how it can be remedied, how we can turn things around, and, God willing, merit to see the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. So we know, our tradition tells us, there's the famous story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. The Talmud in Gittin, the tractate of Gittin, tells us the story which many are familiar with. There was this individual who had a friend whose name was Kamsa. And then he had someone Bar Kamsa, who was his enemy. And he once was celebrating a big festival, he threw a big party, and he asked his servant to invite his good friend Kamsa. And of course there was a miscommunication, and instead of inviting his friend Kamsa, his enemy Bar Kamsa was invited instead. And Bar Kamsa was surprised to receive the invitation, knowing that this was his nemesis, his foe, but he thought maybe the guy wants to make amends, he wants to make up, so he decided to accept the invitation, and he arrives to the party. And when the host notices his presence, he flies into a rage, and he says, "Get out of here." And there's this big party, many people are there. So Bar Kamsa, he's feeling very embarrassed, humiliated. He says, "Please, let me stay. I'm already here. I'm all dressed up. I'll even pay for my meal." And the host said, "No, I'm sorry. I hate you with every fiber of my being. Get out of my party." So he says, "Please, there's so many people here. Let's not make a scene. I'm willing to even pay for half of this party." And the host says, "No, under no circumstance, please leave right now." He says, "Please don't embarrass me in front of all of these people. I will pay for everything, the entire meal. I will pay for the waiters. I'll tip. I'll do whatever you want. Please let me stay." And he says, "Absolutely not. Get out of here." And he was ejected from the party. And this Bar Kamsa is extremely humiliated. He promises that he will get even, he will take revenge. And so he goes to the Caesar, the emperor in Rome, and he informs on them that the Jewish people are planning a revolt, which all of that culminates in the destruction of the temple, which the Talmud observes that this was the primary cause of the destruction of the second temple due to the hatred, the senseless hatred amongst the Jewish people. So we need to understand this phenomenon about hatred, but specifically it seems that in addition to a general form of hatred, there's something about sinat chinam, an unjustified, baseless hatred that people have for each other. What would prompt someone who has this big party, maybe it was a wedding of his son, and you have everything there, you have your friends, you have your family, it's the most wonderful occasion, but yet there is this one person who's there, and his presence in the party bothers you so profoundly that you cannot tolerate his existence, to the extent that if he's not thrown out of the party, you cannot celebrate. You can't move on. Where does that come from? What is the character? What typifies this kind of hatred? Where does it come from? And if possible, to understand how can it be resolved? So the truth is, it's explained in Hasidic thought that there are two types of hatred. There is a hatred that there's what we would call, if it's possible to say normal, but the typical type of hatred, which is generally about a certain interests or certain things that a person cares about. People fight, disagree over monetary matters, or sometimes people can bicker and fight about honor or some other type of interest or want that a person has. But then there's another type of hatred, what we mentioned before as sinat chinam, senseless, irrational hatred. What does that mean? What's irrational about it? The fight is not about anything specific. It's not about money. It's not about love. It's not about power. It's not about honor. It is the very fact that one person cannot tolerate, cannot stand another person. What's happening here? Why can't you stand this person? This person feels that we can't be both in the same room together. The world is not big enough for both of us. Anything that person has, when that person gets more, I feel like I'm diminished, I'm getting less. When that person succeeds, I feel like I'm a failure. It is the very existence of that person that bothers me. So this is a very, very difficult type of hatred to wrap our heads around. There is no logical explanation why you hate that person. It is that person's very existence, the fact that he exists, that is so bothersome to you, and you can't tolerate it. Chassidus explains, you know what's going on here? What's happening is the root cause of this hatred is really, it's not about anything specific. It's about ego. It's about a person's overinflated sense of self-worth. And really, this is what the problem's all about. What's happening here is you may give all kinds of justifications, rationalizations, why you don't like this person. But really, those are cover-ups. Those are explanations that come after the fact. The reality is you don't like that person fundamentally, existentially. You came along and you start to give explanations why, but that's not really the cause. You can't tolerate that person because of your gaiva, your arrogance, your narcissism. There's a famous story of a chassid who came to the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, and he said, Rebbe, I'm going through a very difficult time right now. Everybody, whoever I meet, I'm constantly being criticized, I'm being undermined. I go into the Beis Medrash, I go into the house of prayer and worship and study, and everyone is stepping all over me. They're constantly sniping at me, and I can't deal with this anymore. They're always trying to do whatever they can to diminish me, to put me down, denigrate me. And the Rebbe told him, you know what's happening here? Because you are spreading yourself around the entire Beis Medrash. So of course, if you are everywhere in the Beis Medrash, people are stepping on you, because where else should they go? Wherever they go, they find you. Perhaps if you wouldn't spread yourself all over the entire Beis Medrash, you won't feel that people are stepping on you. In other words, what the Rebbe is saying here is that if you are feeling that people are constantly criticizing you, or if other people just bother you, plain and simple, it's not them, it's actually you. The problem starts with you. If your egocentricity is so pronounced, it's so important that you feel whatever someone else do affects you, the problem is you have to look within yourself. And what happens is, because of your arrogance, because of your inflated ego, any person, if they're successful, that bothers you, because how could that person succeed? That means there's something that I'm not gaining. There's something about that's not enhancing my ego and my self-worth. So this, in a sense, captures the difference between the hatred, that the general hatred, there's a certain reason people get into a fight about something. Then there is the ultimate divisiveness, the ultimate hatred that the Talmud calls sinat chinam, the unjustified hatred, because at the end of the day, there is no justification. There's no defending this kind of hatred. It doesn't make any sense. It's irrational. So therefore, it's sinat chinam. It's baseless. It's senseless. And what happens is, at the end of the day, what's so difficult about this, and what's so pernicious and insidious in the nature of this hatred, is that a general hatred, the first type, that is based on a certain cause or reason or an interest, there's a compromise. Okay? Listen, you're fighting over $1 million, so one side compromises, another side compromises, a little bit less money for you, a little less money for this person, and you make a deal. There's peace. Or some other interest, you could find common ground. The problem is, if it's the sinat chinam, if it's the senseless hatred, there is no backing down. Because at the end of the day, what you're fighting for is your very existence. So you can't compromise. And therefore, this sinat chinam is so irrational, because what could justify such a hatred? Nothing. And the only thing that will satisfy you is the complete annihilation of the other person. Chassidus explains that this is the difference between the battle that the Jewish people waged until this point and Midian. Midian, if you look throughout history, the enemies of the Jewish people, oftentimes there's explanation, there's a justification for it, at least a logical one. When the Jewish people were in Mitzrayim, there was Paro, the Egyptians, they said, oh no, look at these people. They are multiplying. They are a prolific nation. They will soon grow so big and turn into this fifth column that will completely take us over. They were concerned about the demographic nature, the growth of the Jewish people. And so, of course, we had to fight that. We read in the previous parshiot about the battles against Ammon and Moab. They had a legitimate fear. They thought that we would trespass their border, we would fight with them. It makes sense that they were scared, they wanted to fight us. Sichon and Og, they saw that we were on a path, we were going to conquer them. So there was a battle. But Midian makes no sense. Midian was not in the geographic area where the Jewish people were. They weren't going to pass through them. They weren't going to fight with them. They didn't even know about them. They had no relationship. And yet, Midian decided to come from the other side of the desert, go out of their way, and fight them, to fight against the Jews. That typifies the Sinat Chinam because there was no basis for their interaction. There was no reason why the Jews and the Midian should cross paths. And yet, they decided to fight anyways. Chassidus explains that Midian has the etymological root of Madon, Meriva. Madon means strife, fighting. Midian, at its core, personifies the notion of divisiveness, hatred. It's all about creating fights, bickering, strife. And underlying all of that, of course, where does that divisiveness come from? Where does that separation, that fighting come from? It's because there's an underlying hatred. And that hatred can only be what causes one person to want to separate from another person is the intolerance. It's the fact that another person, their very existence bothers me. And this is why we need to fight with Midian. As we mentioned before, because such a battle, if it's about a regular hatred, there's a resolution, there's reconciliation. If your very existence bothers me, they will never stop. Midian will never give up until we cease to exist. And therefore, we need to do battle with them. We need to uproot this evil at its core, at its root. Because so long Midian exists and we exist, there can never be a reconciliation. We could never compromise. And therefore, it's an interesting phenomenon. There were greater enemies, so to speak, of the Jewish people. People who did, say, Paro, Mitzrayim. We don't find anywhere in the Torah a command to take revenge against Mitzrayim, against other nations. But it's Midian. Midian, it's a battle that we need to wage to get rid of this evil, dangerous, damaging sort of evil in life, this Sinat Chinam. This is the case, not just for all the tribes, the 11 tribes, but as well the Shevet of Levi, the holy tribe that was devoted to Torah study, to prayer, because this battle is not just a battle that is relevant to the Jewish people at large. It is a battle that every single person must participate, because the truth is, it is not just the actual battle, the engagement between the way we fight with our enemy Midian. Each and every one of us in our own lives, we have a general hatred that we contend with, but we also have to deal with Sinat Chinam. Each and every one of us. It's something that we all experience, maybe when we were young, some other person in our class that we may have not got along with. It's something that we experience throughout our entire lives. And therefore, even Levi, the Shevet of Levi, needed to be involved in this battle. Because the truth is, senseless hatred is not just something that exists by the commoners, by the lay people, even the righteous, even the holy ones. There could be a struggle with their ego. In fact, what happens is, by the people who are more righteous, more pious, they can actually suffer from it in a more subtle way. But it's very, very hard to detect, because since they're engaged in holy and noble behaviors and character traits and their service of Hashem, it could be very, very hard to detect, because they may camouflage, they may cloak their loathing, despising of another person as a noble thing, as a holy thing. But really what's underlying it is the intolerance of that person. And therefore, it would be important for even the tzaddikim, the holy people, to deal with this Midian, this challenge that we have, each and every one of us. So here's the question that we need to understand. How indeed can we deal with this? We've diagnosed perhaps the problem, but how do we deal with it? How do we remedy? How do we resolve this seemingly most dangerous most insidious challenge, sinat chinam. And as we mentioned, it's not just a general problem, it's something that we need to worry about today, because during these 3 weeks, as we mentioned before, and the Talmud tells us in the Tractate Yoma, that the second temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, senseless hatred. So, what's the answer? How do we turn things around? So number one, we need to understand the gravity, how serious it really is. We need to be honest and understand that when we look around in our relationships in life, we need to know exactly those we get along with, but especially those that we don't get along with. What is happening? Is it because of an actual event, an actual experience, altercation, disagreement? Was that the root cause of the problem? Or was it something that actually happened afterwards? And then we can no longer tell the difference between what is the cause and what is the symptom. They tell the story of the Chafetz Chaim, that in his town there was 2 people who were in an argument, they were fighting. And one of them was a particularly wealthy person, affluent, and they were getting to a fight and it was getting very ugly. And it happened that this wealthy individual, his child became very, very sick. So the Chafetz Chaim came to him and said, look how bad things are. Your child is so ill. Who knows if this is a sign or of some reason why this is happening? Don't you think it's time to give up, make peace with this person? And this person said, the wealthy person says, never. My child may die, but I am going to win. I am going to win. Which is a very, very shocking thing for a person to say. But it tells us gives us a very powerful perspective, very powerful insight in the nature of this hatred. That it starts initially, you fight over some money or some other thing. Maybe someone's honor was slighted. They didn't receive a bracha, but the chuppah, who knows what they're fighting over. But over time, it evolves. It's not about the actual event or experience that happened. It becomes personal. And then it totally consumes the person to the core, to the extent that at this point, it is never about the details. It becomes about the battle. Who is going to win? Who is going to be victorious? And it becomes an existential fight. And then it becomes very, very hard to reconcile, to be able to make a compromise. Because I'm fighting for my life. If you feel that you're fighting to your very existence, compromise is so hard because you're feeling like you're going to rip a limb off yourself to make peace. And to do that is extremely, extremely difficult. If you're fighting over a few dollars, you could make peace. But if I'm fighting for my existence, how can I dismember myself to make peace with this other person? It's impossible. So what do we do? How do we resolve this? So like we mentioned, number one is to be honest with ourselves. If we have a conflict, if there's some kind of disagreement, if there's some fight that we have with another person, we need to examine and be very honest with ourselves. Why do we truly dislike this person? Why do we truly hate this person? Is it because the $100? Or is it something much, much deeper? Is there something about this person that I cannot tolerate? Chassidus explains, there's a mimer, a Chassidic discourse that tells us a fascinating insight. If the root cause of our intolerance of another person is our ego, what happens is we become so detached from our service from Hashem. It's not just in isolation, we can't get along with this person. What happens is when this person will go through a difficult moment in our lives, in their lives, we may even be secretly happy about it. Or at least if they're going through pain, it doesn't bother us. Because we are so preoccupied with ourselves that that person's misfortune, their misery, does not bother us. And if we see something about that person that is actually something that should inspire us, the reality is we don't believe it, because we're so attached and so engrossed with our own lives, we can't believe that somebody else would be altruistic, would be selfless. So we judge everyone through our prism. So ultimately, the hatred and the intolerance of this other person is not just a bein adam lachavera, an interpersonal fight, disagreement. It affects our relationship with Hashem as well. So the only way we can undo this, the only way we could resolve or rehabilitate this, is if we go to the other extreme. Instead of being totally preoccupied with ourselves, if we have sinat chinam, if we have senseless hatred, then what do we need to do? We have to have unjustified, baseless love. That is the antidote, the Rebbe said. The only way to truly rid ourselves of this form of hatred is to go to the opposite extreme. What does that mean? If the root cause is our egocentric, inflated ego, then the opposite of that is extreme humility, selflessness, altruism. There was once a Rebbe, a Hasidic Rebbe, who asked his followers, he said, there's an interesting thing. Why, when you have a cup of tea and you put some sugar inside of it, it becomes sweet? So he explained that the tea, it only becomes sweet when the sugar becomes completely dissolved. Then the drink becomes sweetened. However, if you put the sugar in the tea and the sugar remains undissolved, it retains its character, so then the tea is not sweet. Which teaches us a very, very profound thing. And that is, ultimately, if we want to enhance, to sweeten the lives of those around us, it is not by them feeling our existence. It is only when our existence is not felt, but it's rather the effects. Just like the sugar in the tea. The sugar itself cannot be felt, so to speak, within the tea. It is only by the complete dissolving, the elimination of the core aspects of the sugar, to the extent that you don't feel the sugar anymore, it's just its effects. Only then can this tea be enhanced. And so too, we have to realize it is by diminishing our existence, the rough edges, so to speak, of our character, it is then we are able to enhance the lives of those around us. And that's why it's explained in Chassidus that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu a fascinating thing. This battle against Midian was going to be the last mission, the last charge, so to speak, for Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem says, you should take revenge against Midian, and afterwards you will pass away. This was the last thing. In fact, some of the people, they didn't really want to join this battle because they knew that if they wait, as soon as this battle is done, Moshe Rabbeinu's time is up. But it seems that Moshe Rabbeinu cannot pass on until this battle happens, and it has to be Moshe Rabbeinu. And one of the ideas behind it is, as we know, Moshe Rabbeinu personifies, he embodies the notion of humility. Moshe was the most humble person ever that walked the face of the earth. We've discussed this several weeks earlier, the Parsha Ba'alotcha. And this is really the antidote. How do we subdue Midian, which Midian is the very antithesis of holiness? As we know, holiness, Kedusha, is all about unity, camaraderie, brotherly love. Midian, as we said, Madon, strife, divisiveness, hatred, is the polar opposite. It's the opposite of unity. It's the opposite of togetherness. But that divisiveness, as we mentioned, is because of a person's gaiva, their yeshut, their arrogance, their narcissism. So it is Moshe Rabbeinu. It is the character of Moshe Rabbeinu, the quality and the trait of humility, when we are more humble and we come to appreciate and more sensitive to those who are around us. It is only then we are able to neutralize Midian and everything it stands for. So it had to be Moshe. And we know in every single one of us that we have the spark of Moshe Rabbeinu. We have that special ability to tap into our soul, to our neshama. And therefore, when we feel someone who is bothering us, it feels that whatever they do, it's an affront to our existence, we take a step back and we ask ourselves, why is that person truly bothering us? Is it something that they did? Or does the problem really start within us? And when we refine ourselves and we work on our character and on our ego to elevate it, to sublimate it somewhat, we'll come to realize that all of those things around us that were bothering us before, it may not completely go away, but at least we'll be less sensitive to other people's criticism, to other things that people did to us. There's a story of once there were these two Hasidim who were partners in business. And one time it came to a point where they were in trouble they ran afoul with the government, and one of the partners informed on his partner in order to get a good deal, perhaps, with the government, that they should be lenient with him. And because of his informing on him, that other partner was thrown into jail. He was in jail for 2 years. After he served his sentence, he came out, and he learned that his other partner, eventually the law caught up with him, and he too was thrown into jail. What did this chassid do? Well, we know what many people would do. Maybe they do a little dance, be happy. But this chassid, he went over to his partner's family. He went over to his wife and told her, I'm taking upon myself, so long that your husband is in jail, I am going to support you and your entire family, everything from A to Z. You have nothing to worry about. And indeed, the entire duration that her husband was in jail, this person who informed on him and caused him to go to jail, he supported them, that person's entire family. This informer, this person who was informed upon, he supported his informer's wife and family the entire time he was in jail. When the Alter Rebbe heard about this story, he was so inspired that he added in the Tanya, in the 12th chapter, when he describes the Beinoni, the intermediary type, who is the model to which every person should strive to be in their service of Hashem, he added a few lines. And he said that we can learn, each person should learn and strive to be like Yosef. The Zohar tells us that we know that Yosef, he endured from his brothers, his fellow brothers, the most horrific form of abuse, neglect. When he was a young lad of 17, they sold him into slavery. And even before that, they weren't getting along, but this was the most horrific form of betrayal. They sold him what was at that point perceived to be, initially they wanted to kill him, and then they sold him into slavery, which was essentially a life sentence, which he would have no prospects or hope to get out of. And yet, when Yosef, when he turns things around and he catapults to be the second in command in Mitzrayim and running all of the affairs, and he meets his brothers, what does he do to them? Instead of taking revenge, being angry, what does he do? He is the most gracious, humble, and hospitable person you could ever be. takes care of them, he supports them all of the years. So the Alter Rebbe says we should all, the Beinoni is someone who should, when someone in life wrongs you, harms you, hurts you, not only should you not be angry with them and take revenge, God forbid, rather you should repay them with something positive, with something good. And this, the Alter Rebbe was inspired from this story of these two brothers. Where does that come from? How is someone able to look at another person who did something to them and repay them not with bad, to harm them in retribution, but in fact to repay them with goodness and kindness? This is because a person will work on their character, refine themselves. And therefore, when someone does something to you, instead of saying, why did that person do it? You say, maybe this is from Hashem. This is all meant to be. That's how Yosef looked at his life. In the end, everything that happened to him, he wasn't just sold into slavery by a random sequence of events of his brothers. It was actually all orchestrated by Hashem. He was sent on a very, very special mission. This act of being sold into slavery was Hashem, through the agency of his brothers, sending him down to Mitzrayim for a very, very special mission, to save all of mankind from a horrific famine. And therefore, every single one of us, if we think less of ourselves and we are more in tune with Hashem, so then we look at everything that happens in our lives, we are less sensitive, we are not feeling affronted by every insult, by every criticism that is thrown our way. It is then we are able to diminish that sense of hatred, animosity, divisiveness. So may it be Hashem's will that in these 3 weeks we should all strive in our lives, with our families, our friends, to work on ourselves, to become more humble, to become more in tune with our relationship with Hashem. And may it be Hashem's will that through increasing ahavat chinam, unjustified, senseless, irrational love for every single person, a person who is your enemy, is your nemesis, instead of fighting back, you give them a hug. You love them more. We are able to undo the very cause why we're in Galus. And may it be Hashem's will, very soon we merit to the coming of Mashiach, the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash speedily in our days. Amen.